The night I said no for the second time, my husband did not raise his voice. He did not strike me. He did not even look at me. He simply stood up from the edge of the bed, walked to the hook on the wall, took his coat, and left the room. And I remember thinking, as I lay there listening to his footsteps go down the stairs and out the back door into the cold, that silence from a man in our community was not peace. Silence was a language I was still learning to read. And what it said that night, I would spend the next 12 years trying to understand. There is a thing that happens in Amish households that no one outside ever sees. No one talks about it in the visiting hours, no one prays over it on Sunday. It does not leave marks the elders can witness. But it is as real as the wood smoke that clings to every dress you own, and it settles into a marriage the same way. Slowly, permanently, into every corner. I want to tell you what that thing is. But first, I need to go back to the night it began. Because what I have never told anyone, not my sister, not the therapist I finally found at 61 years old, not even in the quiet of my own prayers, is what happened in the 3 days after that second refusal. What my husband set into motion without ever raising his hand. What the community allowed. What I was told God required of me. If you stay with me through this, I will tell you all of it. But I need you to understand first who I was before that night. Because you cannot understand what was taken from me unless you know what I had. Before we go any further, there is something I want to say from the heart. More than 90% of the people watching right now have not subscribed yet. And perhaps that would not matter so much if these stories were just words. But they are not. They are pieces of real lives. Pieces of women who were never allowed to speak. Pieces of moments that shaped everything and were carried in silence for decades. So if you have found something true in this video, if something in these words has reached a place in you that needed reaching, please take one moment to subscribe. It is completely free and it helps this community keep growing. And while you are here, I want to know, what feeling brought you to this video tonight? Tell me in the comments below. My name inside the community was not Rebecca. That is the name I chose when I left, because I needed something that was mine and only mine, chosen without permission, belonging to no family but myself. Inside the community, I was someone's daughter first, then someone's wife, then someone's mother. And the order of those things was never accidental. I was married at 19 to a man 8 years older than me. His name was Jonas. He was not cruel in the way that word is usually meant. He did not shout. He worked hard from before light until after dark, and he never once forgot his duties to God or community. What he was, and I understand this now in a way I could not at 19, was a man who had been taught his entire life that a wife's body was part of the covenant. Not a person in possession of a body that had been given over on the day of the wedding, in front of the bishop and God and everyone we had ever known. And that body, once given, was not something a woman had the right to reclaim. Not because anyone said this outright. They never said it outright. It was in the silence around certain questions, in the way the older women would lower their voices and then change the subject, in the way my mother had pressed my hand before the wedding and said, "You will learn to give him what he needs," and the way she had looked at me when she said it, like she was apologizing for something she did not have words for. Jonas and I built our first years the way you build anything in that community, with work and with duty, and with a silence you come to believe is the same thing as contentment. I learned the rhythms of his moods the way you learn the rhythms of a farm, which seasons were generous, which were difficult, which signs meant a storm was gathering. And for the first 7 years, I gave him what was expected. Not because the marriage had grown into something warm and mutual, but because the cost of not giving it was something I had felt from the very first time I hesitated. And that cost was not delivered in anger. That is the thing I need you to understand. It was never anger. It was something quieter, and therefore something that reached further into a person. The first time I said no, Jonas was cold. For 4 days, he did not speak to me directly. He spoke around me. He would say to our oldest, "Tell your mother the water needs fetching." He would sit at the table and eat without looking at me, not with fury, just with an absence, a removal of himself that was so total and so deliberate that after 4 days, I felt I was disappearing, that I was becoming a ghost in my own kitchen. On the 5th day, I told him I was sorry. I do not know what I was apologizing for. I know only that the silence had become something I could not survive. And when it ended, I felt not relief, but a knowledge that had settled into my bones. I had learned the shape of the cage. And learning its shape is not the same as accepting it. It only means you know where the walls are. The second refusal came 3 years later. Our third child was 4 months old. I was tired in a way I do not have words for even now. Not just the tiredness of a body that has grown and delivered a life, a tiredness that was older than that. The tiredness of a woman who has been available for years in every way a person can be available, and who one ordinary night simply did not have anything left to give. I said no quietly, without anger, the way you say no to more bread when your stomach is already full. And Jonas stood up, took his coat from the hook, and walked out into the cold. And this time, the silence did not last 4 days. This time, something different happened. Something I had not seen before, and did not understand until it was already done. Within 2 days, my mother-in-law came to visit. She had not been invited. She came on a Tuesday afternoon, and she sat at my kitchen table and talked about nothing for almost an hour. About the weather, about her garden, about a family from the next district whose son had been sick. And then, just before she stood to leave, she said, very gently, without looking directly at me, "Jonas is a good husband, Rebecca. A man needs to feel his wife is with him. It is part of the covenant." Not asking, reminding. And I sat there with my 4-month-old in my arms, and I understood. He had gone to his own mother and reported me. And she had come, quietly, without accusation, to close the door that my refusal had tried to open. And that was only the first of it. What happened in the week that followed is the part I have never spoken aloud. Because I think there are women listening who have felt the walls close in and not had the words for how it happened. This is how it happened. The bishop's wife came 3 days after my mother-in-law. She brought a pie. She sat at my table. She asked about the baby. She was kind, the way a stone is smooth after years in a river, shaped by something harder than itself into something that offers no resistance. She told me that marriage was a garden that required tending from both hands. She told me that submission was not weakness, but wisdom. She told me all of this in a voice so soft and so practiced that it felt like comfort. And only afterward, lying in bed that night, did I understand it had been a warning. My own mother came on the 6th day. She held my hand and said, "I know it is hard." And I waited for the part where she told me I was allowed to be exhausted. But that was not what came. She said, "Give him what he needs, Rebecca. It is easier than the alternative." And she looked at me with something in her eyes that I understand now was grief. a grief she had been carrying for her own marriage for 30 years and had learned to call something else. And I sat there with all of those women having come in 1 week, quietly, without accusation, having surrounded me like water surrounds a stone. And I understood. This was what the community did when a wife said no more than once. Not with violence, not with commands. With the gentle, relentless pressure of everyone who loved you, making clear that the path of least resistance ran through your own surrender. And that is a harder thing to name than cruelty, because it came wrapped in the faces of the people you loved most. Because it looked, from every angle, like they were trying to help you. If this story is the kind of truth you have been waiting to hear, please take 1 second right now to subscribe and turn on the notification bell. The algorithm rewards videos that people actually watch all the way through. And you finishing this one matters more than you know. I want to tell you what I built from that. I did not leave immediately. I did not know yet that leaving was something I was allowed to want. What I did was smaller than leaving. And I think sometimes smaller things take more courage because they have no name and no audience and no one to witness them. I began to wake up 20 minutes before the rest of the house. Before Jonas, before the children, before the morning prayers and the fire and the water and the bread. I would sit in the kitchen in the dark, before the lamp was lit, and I would do nothing. Just sit with myself in the silence and be no one's wife and no one's mother for 20 minutes. It sounds so small, I am almost ashamed to tell you. But those 20 minutes were the first thing I had kept for myself in 11 years of marriage. And they felt, sitting there in the dark, like something dangerous. Like a door I was not supposed to know existed. Over months, those 20 minutes became a kind of private life. I began to think clearly in a way I had not thought in years. I noticed that my tiredness was not weakness. It was information. I noticed that the guilt I felt when I said no was not God's voice. It was training. I noticed that every woman I knew well had the same look in her eyes at a certain hour of the day. A look I had no word for then, but that I understand now as the look of a person living at a slight remove from their own life. Like the real self had learned to stand a little behind the eyes and watch. And in those dark kitchen mornings, I began, very slowly, to come back to the window of myself and look out again. Jonas never knew about the 20 minutes. He would never have understood what I was taking. He would not have seen it as taking at all. That was the saddest part. He was not a monster. He was a man who had been built by the same community that had built me, and he believed completely in the world they had made. He believed my body was part of the covenant because every voice he had ever trusted had told him so. He was not evil. He was formed. And that understanding took me 20 years to reach. And reaching it did not make what happened smaller. It only made it lonelier. Because there's no one to blame in a story like that. Only a system. And systems do not sit across from you in a room. You cannot look a system in the eye and tell it what it cost you. And yet, the cost was real. The cost was decades. The cost was a body that learned to be absent from itself. The cost was a woman who woke in the dark for years just to remember she was there. I left the community at 44 years old. I want you to sit with that number. 44. 25 years of marriage, 6 children, a whole life lived inside a fence I had been taught to call love. The leaving did not happen in a single day. It happens the way a stone wears through, slowly, one dark kitchen morning at a time, until the morning came when I understood that the door had always been there. and I had been taught not to see it. I found a therapist. She was an Englishwoman, younger than me, and she asked me questions no one had ever asked. Not, what do you need to do? Not, what does your husband need? Just, how did that make you feel? And I remember the first time she asked me that I could not answer. Not because I did not have feelings, but because I had spent 44 years in a world where feelings were private at best and sinful at worst, and always secondary to duty. I sat in that chair and opened my mouth, and what came out was not words. It was the sound a person makes when something held underwater for a very long time finally surfaces. She waited. She just waited. And when I could finally speak, I told her about the pie, about my mother-in-law on the Tuesday afternoon, about the bishop's wife with her smooth Riverstone voice, about my own mother's hand over mine, saying, "Give him what he needs." And my therapist said, "What was done to you had a name: coercive control. Not a raised hand, not a locked door, the systematic use of the people you love and the community you belong to and the God you have been taught to fear to make your own compliance feel like your only option." I had given my consent every time. I had always, eventually, given my consent. But consent that comes after your mother has visited, and your mother-in-law has visited, and the bishop's wife has visited, and the silence has lasted 4 days, that consent has a roof over it. It is not free. It was never free. What I want to say to you now, wherever you are, whatever world you live in, is this. You do not have to have been hit to have been controlled. You do not have to have been locked in to have been unable to leave. Sometimes the walls are made of love. Sometimes the cage is built from the voices of the people who call themselves your protectors. And the bravest thing you can do in that world is sit in a dark kitchen 20 minutes before anyone else wakes up and remember, quietly, that you exist, that you have a self, that the self has needs that do not require anyone's permission. I am 62 years old. I live alone in a small house with a garden and a lamp I light only when I want to. Because in the dark, I am not anyone's anything. I am just a woman who survived something that did not have a name for a very long time. And I am still here. And I have so much more to tell you. If this story moved you, tell me in the comments what part stayed with you the longest. Tell me your story if you are ready. Or just tell me you are listening. And if you want more honest truths from behind the prayer cap, please subscribe to Rebecca the Amish Woman, like this video, and turn on that notification bell, because there is so much more I have not said yet. Until next time, remember this: your silence was never the same thing as your consent.